How long were the Israelites in Egypt? I preface my remarks by saying that I am reading the Bible simply and assuming that the Israelites were in Egypt. This video also assumes the antiquity of what we currently refer to as the Masoretic text. Although the oldest surviving complete text dates only to 1008, it's actually a very ancient document. Many people assume that the Israelites were slaves to the Egyptians for 400 years. This is derived from the verse in Genesis chapter 15, verse 13, where it is written that the descendants of Abraham, then Abram, would be foreigners, gerim, in a land that does not belong to them, and be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. In the book of Exodus, chapter 12, verses 40 and 41, it is implied that the Israelites sojourned in Egypt for 430 years. However, upon a closer reading of the Bible, one will see that it was impossible for the Israelites to have been in Egypt for so long. Kohath, the grandfather of Moses, was among those who descended to Egypt with Jacob. He lived for 133 years. Amram, Moses' father, lived for 137 years. Moses was 80 years of age at the time of the Exodus. Even if you were to add together the ages of Kohath, Amram, and Moses, an obvious impossibility, you would only arrive at 350 years. All ancient Jewish rabbinic and non-rabbinic texts agree to the impossibility of a 400-year enslavement. This video will explore all of those sources. There are two main approaches in Rabbinic Judaism as to how to deal with this seeming contradiction. The first, and by far the most popular, is that proposed by the Seder Olam. It seeks to construct a timeline to reconcile the difficulty based on scriptural evidence. The Seder Olam calculates the beginning of the 400-year period from the birth of Isaac. Isaac was 60 years old when Jacob was born. Jacob was 130 when he went to Egypt. From Isaac's birth until Jacob went to Egypt was 190 years. Subtract 190 from 400, and that leaves you with 210 years that Israel could have sojourned in Egypt. According to the Bible, the enslavement of the Israelites occurred after the death of Joseph and his brothers. The Seder Olam pinpoints the start of the enslavement of the Israelites to after the death of Levi, who was the last of the brothers to die. Biblically, it is not written explicitly when Levi was born, but Seder Olam extrapolates Levi's age from Joseph's age. It can be inferred that Joseph was born at the end of the 7-year period in which Jacob worked for Rachel. Levi was the third son born to Leah, who bore 7 children in 7 years. Levi, therefore, must have been born during the 3rd year of the 7 years that Jacob worked for Rachel. Joseph was 30 years of age when he appeared before Pharaoh to interpret the latter's dream of the 7 plentiful years and the 7 years of famine. The 7 good years had already passed, as well as 2 years of famine, by the time Jacob and his family descended to Egypt. That would put Joseph at 39 years of age at the time of his family's arrival. Levi, the third son of Leah and Jacob, would have been approximately 4 years older than Joseph when he came to Egypt. Therefore, he would have been around 43 years of age. Subtracting 43 years from his total life of 137 gives you 94 years in which Levi lived in Egypt. According to the reckoning of the Seder Olam, the Israelites would have only actually been enslaved for a total of 116 years out of the 210 years that they were in the land of Egypt. The 430 years in Exodus 12:40 is factored by the covenant between the parts. This would mean that Abraham experienced this vision at the age of 70. Accordingly, he then went back to Haran for 5 years and then left that city for good for the land of Canaan at the age of 75. This rendering of the 430 year problem is the majority opinion in Judaism, again following the Seder Olam. An alternative view offered by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is found in the midrashic work Mechilta. He says the following: one verse says, "And they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years," while another says that in the 4th generation they will return here, meaning to the land of Israel. How are these two verses reconciled? The Holy One, blessed be He, says, "If they repent, I will redeem them according to generations, and if they do not, I will redeem them according to years." In other words, there was no set time for the oppression and exile to end, as was explained in the Seder Olam. Rather, Israel's redemption was merit-based, and time could be added or subtracted to the 400 years as long as it fits into 4 generations. There is almost a unanimous consensus among the great Jewish commentators that the 400-year period told to Abraham starts from the birth of Isaac. The point of contention is the position of the Seder Olam that the covenant between the parts happened prior to Abram leaving Haran at the age of 75. It doesn't fit the simple reading of the story. Understanding the 400-year period as a non-binding number, as well as understanding that the 430 years reflected the time that Israel was worthy to come out, can alleviate the issue of inverting the chronology of the story. In fact, we have a near contemporary rabbinic source to the Seder Olam, the midrashic work Bereshit Rabbah, which dates from the 3rd century, that disagrees with the Seder Olam. The Midrash mentions that the covenant between the parts took place when Abraham was 85 years of age, not 70. This conforms better to the simple reading of the scripture. The Bereshit Rabbah is in agreement with the much older Book of Jubilees, which also mentions Abraham as being 85 years of age at the time of the covenant between the parts. To summarize the rabbinic traditions, the majority opinion is that the 400 years begin with the birth of Isaac and end with the Exodus. The 430-year time period begins from the time of the covenant between the parts, which occurred according to this view when Abraham was 70 years old and finished at the Exodus. The minority opinion also begins the 400-year period of time from the birth of Isaac, but the number was never meant to be precise. It could be lengthened or shortened based on the merit of the Israelites. The 430 years represented the time that elapsed from the birth of Isaac until the Exodus. As stated in the beginning of the video, the non-rabbinic sources also leave no room for 400 years in Egypt. The oldest of the non-rabbinic sources is the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Bible. According to the letter of Aristeas, Josephus, and several places in Talmudic literature, the Septuagint dates to the reign of Ptolemy II Philadelphus in the 3rd century BCE. In Exodus chapter 12, verse 40, it says that the Israelites sojourned in the land of Egypt and Canaan for 430 years. This sounds amazingly close to the idea presented by the Seder Olam, and there is a reason for that. According to Talmudic literature, the rabbis who translated the Septuagint deliberately changed the text in 15 places to avoid misunderstanding. Exodus 12:40 was one of them. The rabbinic understanding is even more striking in the New Testament book of Galatians chapter 3. Not getting into the specifics of Paul's doctrine, he mentions in verse 16 that to Abraham and his seed promises were made. Paul is referencing the covenant between the parts. He continues in verse 17 that the law, or Torah, was given to the Israelites 430 years after that promise to Abraham. The Torah was indeed given on the 50th day after the Exodus in the same year. For the sake of academic integrity, even though both of these texts are assigning the 430-year period from the covenant between the parts and the Exodus, there is no direct proof that they side with the Seder Olam in placing the covenant between the parts when Abraham was 70. As was mentioned earlier, there was also an opinion that the covenant between the parts happened when Abraham was 85 years old. Having Paul use Pharisaic rabbinic chronology should not at all be surprising. Paul, who was born as Saul to a devout Pharisaic Jewish family that he claims traced its lineage all the way back to the tribe of Benjamin, although born in the city of Tarsus in Cilicia and a Greek speaker, he was fluent in Hebrew, which wasn't so common for diaspora Jews of this period. It seems that his family had close ties to Jerusalem, and he was sent to learn under Rabban Gamliel. Whether he actually learned at the feet of Rabban Gamliel is a subject of fierce academic debate, but he definitely affiliated himself with the Pharisees. The Samaritan Pentateuch also translates Exodus 12:40 as it is written in the Septuagint, with the exception of mentioning Canaan before Egypt. However, unlike the Septuagint and the New Testament, the Samaritans have a very different chronology of biblical events. The Samaritan Pentateuch puts Abraham at 85 years of age at the time of the covenant between the parts. Even more interesting, this chronology starts the count of the 430 years to the Exodus from the time that Abraham was 76. The Samaritan chronology puts Jacob's descent into Egypt 214 years after Abraham came to the land of Canaan, and puts the Israelites in Egypt for a total of 215 years. If the Samaritans also believe the slavery commenced with the death of Levi, then according to their chronology, the Israelites were enslaved for 138 years. The final ancient source that deals with the 430 years is Josephus Flavius. He reckons the 430 years as starting from the time that Abraham came to the land of Canaan at the age of 75, but that the Israelites were only in Egypt for 250 years from the time that Jacob arrived there. His count is within 5 years of the Seder Olam and 1 year off from the Samaritan chronology. We are forced to say that he is not reckoning the 400 years from the birth of Isaac. It is worth noting that Josephus contradicts himself. He mentions twice that the Israelites were to be slaves to the Egyptians for 400 years. He also mentions that the Israelites built the pyramids, which today we know was not possible. The pyramids were built much before any timeline puts the Israelites in Egypt. We cannot know for sure how Josephus deals with the issue beyond what he has said. There is room to conjecture that he followed the minority of rabbinic opinion that the 400 years was not an exact number. I have also seen people count the 400 years for Josephus from the time that Isaac was weaned at the age of 5. However, barring further evidence, there is just no way to know what his opinion actually was. In summary, how long were the Israelites in Egypt? According to the Seder Olam, 210 years, of which the Jews were enslaved for 116 years. According to the minority rabbinic opinion, as translated by the great biblical commentators, between 240 and 270 years, of which time they were enslaved for between 146 to 176 years. According to the Samaritan Pentateuch, 215 years, of which they were enslaved for a total of 138 years. According to Josephus, 215 years, of which they were enslaved for 400. Hey guys, if you got benefit out of that, please make sure to smash that like button. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.